Hi folks, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And I just got back from Ostende, from Engelberg, the BMW dealer, and I picked up the smallest BMW on the market today, the 310. And we're going to have a look if this bike lives up to its logo. It's a BMW, but remember, this bike is built in India. But is it BMW quality? Is it a real BMW? This is what we're going to find out in a few minutes. So let's take it inside and take a closer look. The G310 is built in India and not in Spandau in Germany. And there is a good reason for that, because there is a big market in India for lighter bikes. In Europe, most drivers, or BMW drivers, they're going to look down on the 310. But guess what? They will be surprised, because this is a nice machine. But you'll see that in part 2. And they have a special assembly line for the G310. The engineers and the technicians that work on the assembly line, they have been trained for over a year in Germany, in Spandau. So they know the skill set, and everything is under very close supervision of BMW. The bike itself is designed by BMW, as they claim, and we'll have a closer look if that is the case. And I'm really interested to see if it's up to the quality that we expect from a BMW. But overall, the bike looks quite nice. I think the shape is really a big success. It's a very light bike. It's only about 170 kilograms, ready to roll with a full gas tank. So that is not too bad, and that makes it extremely maneuverable compared to all those big bikes. So let's start looking a bit at the engine first. The interesting part about the engine is that the engine is mounted backwards. And normally you would expect that the exhaust is in the front and the intake is in the back. That's not the case with this bike. In fact, the exhaust is all the way in the back, and it's built out of stainless steel. And the reason for that is that it can tilt the engine and it can get a lower gravity point, which improves a lot the stability of the bike. So I think they did a real good job on that. The engine itself is only about a 314 cc, so that's not a lot, but it still develops about 34 horsepower, which is really, really good. And the torque is 28 Newton meters at 7,500 RPM. The engine is actually water cooled, and it's fitted with an ECU. So it has a lot of electronics on it. It's only an electrical starter. It doesn't have a kickstarter, but I don't think any bikes nowadays have that. The engine is water cooled, and the radiator is all the way up front. And on this bike, they have mounted a protection grille for the radiator, because if you have stones flying up, you could damage the radiator. So that's always a good thing to have this guard. The other thing on the engine is that the oil filter is also in the front, and this is so easy to replace the oil filter. So this is really with maintenance in thought that developed this bike. The motor itself is a double overhead camshaft with 4 valves per cylinder, which it really brings a lot of extra power, because this engine really has to have it from its RPMs. It's easy to rev it up to about 10,000 RPM, and that's about the red line, but it really comes to life around 7,500 RPM. Checking the oil level is very handy, because there's an hourglass right here. You can see it. It's very handy. This marks low and high mark, and you just got to make sure it's in between the two when the bike is parked flat and warm. That is a very quick check. No more things to remove or bolts or nuts to remove. You just can look at it. The bike is chain driven, and here is the front sprocket, and you can actually see it. You only have to do a couple of bolts, and then you can actually get to it, which is quite handy if you have to replace the chain. The clutch is quite good. It's not that hard, not that soft. Let's have a look on the chain. So it's a pretty big chain, and easy accessible, so it's easy to clean. And it has a few slipping areas or roller areas. This is one of those rolling points where the chain is actually resting on. And you probably will have to replace this every so often when there is too much wear and tear on it. And you have a nicely marked rear axle with adjustments to adjust the tension of the chain. There's marks on it, so how much play you can have, and it's around 4 to 50 millimeters. That's what you can have when the bike is in idle position. This bike already shows a little bit of rust on this chain. It's a bit awkward to see these little rust dots, but then again, it doesn't really matter. You know, it's probably need to be resprayed. It looks like it's been a while that it's been cleaned up. So that's what we're going to do. Now, cleaning your chain is typically around every 1,000 kilometers, but it all depends a little bit on the use and where you use it, on the weather conditions and so on. But the maintenance on the bike, we'll talk about it later. I think that BMW did a real good job with the tires by fitting proper tires from the start. We have Michelin tires on this bike from day one. Now that is really good, because often you get those cheap tires on it, but in this case I like it. The rims are light alloy rims with 5 spokes consisting out of one piece, and that is quite good, and they are balanced by the time you get them, so you don't have to worry about vibration. The front tire is a bit thinner, but still it's a great tire. And that brings me to the brakes. Now in the front we have a nice disc, and the disc is about 300 millimeters, so that's quite nice. And it's fitted with brake calipers by Bro. And by Bro means by Brembo. It's not actually Brembo, but it's very similar to that. It's actually a sub-brand of Brembo. It's a dual cylinder caliper, and it has brake pads, and on the brake pads you have actually a chamfer, so you can actually see when you have to replace it. So I think this is quite nice. Now this bike is fitted with an ABS system by BMW, and here you see that little disc at the center of the brake disc with all these little markers on, or little metal plates, and that's a detection area for your ABS. So if your wheel is blocking, then it will be seen, and it will make sure that you don't get a blocking situation. So if you have problems with that one, have a look on that. There's a sensor as well there, but we'll talk about all this later. But that's what the ABS system is. So that's really great on this bike. And BMW also provided a steel-enforced brake hose, as you can see here, and this is rust-free, so that is a very good point. I'm really happy that BMW did this. The rear disc is around 240 millimeters, and it's a bit smaller than the front one, and it has a single-cylinder caliper fitted on the top. The little wire you see here and this little sensor, this is again your ABS, so you have ABS both on the front and on the back, and this is the sensing ring for your ABS. Adjusting the chain, as we've seen before, this is through this mechanism, and you have nice marks on it, so you can adjust it by this nut to put the chain onto the right tension, but I'll show you that in another video. Wear and tear on the brakes can be checked very simple. There is actually on the brake pads a chamfer, which is kind of a slanted edge, and if that is worn out, then it's time to change the brake pads. They don't have any automatic detection. I put a little bit of a white spot on it so you can actually see it where it is. I have only one negative point on this bike, and that's the rear brake pedal. I think it's way too far to the inside and way too deep. If your foot is here, see how far you have to bend it. That's a lot. And it's really at the inside, so it would have been better if it was a little bit more outward. And you probably could do this by, cutting it off and re-welding it. I probably will do that anyway to make it a bit easier. But then again, it all depends what you're used to. And the braking fluid for the rear brake is on the right-hand side of the bike, just underneath the saddle. And you have markers as well, so you can easily see if you have to top it up or not. If you do top it up, use .4, don't forget. That's important. The front brakes need a little bit of squeezing, not too much, but a little bit more than normal. But that's because the brakes are not that aggressive, they don't bite that hard. And that's quite good for a beginner's bike. Checking the braking fluid, you have a little hourglass here, and you can see where the minimum line is. It's all the way on the bottom, so that should always be filled up. If it's too low, open up the 2 screws and fill it up. So I think overall they did a good job. In fact, all the levers, they work quite nice. I think the overall build is really good. I haven't seen really anything bad yet. Now let's have a look on the suspension. The 310 is fitted with what we call an upside down fork, front fork. Normally you have the aluminum part on the top and the other part on the bottom, while with the 310 that's just the opposite. And it looks marvelous. Look at this golden shine. I think this really is nice. You can see how beautiful the finishing is. This is really great. This is perfect, well built, high quality, high standard. It's so refined. So I don't think that we can say that this is not BMW quality. This is high BMW quality. And in fact, you have the labels all over the bike. So really, it's great quality and great finishing. And in fact, the whole bike is like this. Everything looks good, looks nice, and cool. If you ask me, the 310G is certainly worthwhile the BMW logo. It is a BMW bike, no matter what people say. The back suspension is a monoshock, and there's a small adjustment ring all the way on the top that you can adjust for a smoother ride. There isn't much to adjust, but at least there is a little bit. I think the suspension is great. It's not too hard, not too soft. It's really perfect for me. And I guess it all depends a bit on your weight. If you're really a heavy guy or a light guy, it may be different. I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to be able to get different springs in the future. And maybe you have them already. The muffler is built out of stainless steel. It's fitted on the right hand side, and you can actually see the pipe coming out here. This is the exhaust pipe, guys, coming from the back of the engine, which is kind of awkward, as I said before. Typically that's just the other way around. These exhaust pipes are normally sitting in the front of the engine, but BMW didn't do that because they wanted to lower the gravity point of the bike, so make it more maneuverable, so they turned the engine around. So we call this a reverse engine, by the way. Now the exhaust itself looks real nice, real cool. I like the sound of it. Some people won't like the sound, and I will let you listen in a few seconds. I think it's great. So guys, so far we looked at many different details on this bike, and I have to say the finishing overall is really marvelous. And if you don't believe it, go and check it out in a dealership and take a test ride, because it's worthwhile. The next thing we're going to do is to have a look at the gas tank and some other stuff on the saddle, and then a little bit on the instrumentation, and then we should be done with this, and then we go in for a test ride, but that will be in part number 2. The gas tank takes 11 liters of unleaded fuel. It's recommended to run with octane 98 and don't use any alcohol-based fuels. And again, have a look on the finish, how great that is. It really looks good. Now, fuel consumption is going to depend a bit on the way you drive. If you drive fast and you accelerate very fast, then obviously you're going to have a lot of fuel consumption, but BMW reckons that you're going to run around 3.3 liters in average. Now, I think that's a bit on the low side. I would rather expect you're going to be running around 4 liters. And in terms of controls, these switches are all really very nice and smooth. I really like it. I think a lot of Japanese bikes can take an example on this bike, because they are really well designed and they feel sturdy, they feel good, they feel solid, as a switch should feel. The handlebars are great, even the gas throttle feels good. Normally with cheaper bikes, small bikes, you don't feel this great thing. It's very heavy, spring-loaded. I like that. The instrument cluster is just a single LCD display with a control knob, so you will be able to toggle between the different menus. But it is actually quite readable, and you can see it well in daylight or at night. And as you can see, you can flip through the different menus. I'm just going to go real quick through it, not talking about all the different things, but it is really intuitive, and that's what I really like about this. You have your speed, you know, the distance, and you also have the gear you're in, and I really like gear positioning. The only thing I don't like about it is on the bottom, which is actually the RPM meter. That is something I'm not too keen of. I would have hoped that they would have had a dial, but they didn't. So this is in terms of lights, the headlight is quite nice. High beam, low beams, and you can even flip it if you want. There's a little switch on the steering handle to flash your lights. I always like that. The taillight is fitted with LEDs, and that's the only place where you have LEDs, including the stoplight or the brake light. Blinkers are standard bulbs, and you need to switch back the switch to turn it off. The saddle height is 87 centimeters, which is great for a short guy like me. I'm only 1.68 meters, so this works just fine for me. So even if you're a short guy, you can drive this bike very easily. This bike, it is a BMW. And now let's see what's under the saddle, because I would like to see the diagnostics connector and the tools that come with this bike. So let's open it up. Removing the saddle is easy. Just use your key, put it in the side, flip it, and then you can lift the saddle out. That's all there is to it. Under the saddle you'll find your battery, and you find your diagnostics plug, your OBD2. You can clip it on the sides and pull out the plug, and I'll show you that how you can use it in a minute. Now, dealers don't like you to do this. They don't like you at all that you're actually going to read out error codes on your bike, but I think you should. In the back, we've got a toolbox or a bag with tools, different tools. It's still in the bag here, but you can see this special kind of key. And this key is what you need to use to adjust the monoshock in the back so you can tighten up the spring a bit or release the spring a bit. That's what you're going to need. But it's a nice piece of tools here, and the tools look pretty good quality as well, so I can't really complain. And in fact, you see everywhere labels, BMW labels, which is really, really good. In fact, this is a label for road assist. Not bad. So guys, what I'm going to show you now is something the dealer doesn't like you to see most of the time, but nevertheless, I think you have the right to see this, and you should do this if you can. This is an OBD2 reader. This is a standard, and it can read out the error codes on your bike. So if your little light is on with the little engine on it, a malfunction code, you can disconnect this connector, the OBD connector, and then you can hook up this little tester. This runs you around 40 euros, and you can hook it up, and then you can actually see what the problem is. Let me show you that. Now, this bike shouldn't have any issues. So we hooked up the OBD3 reader or tester to the OBD plug, and this is the OBD3 plug, which is part of the bike. And now we're going to read out any error codes or any other problems that could be on the bike, but you can also check the VIN number and things like that. So let me just turn on the ignition. There we go. So we're running some checks. We're reading out the current ECU, the computer of the bike, and you see there's no error codes, and that's important. You can also check live data if you want, but for that, of course, the bike has to run. So as an example, we're going to read out the RPMs. So I'm going to start the bike. Right now we have 0 RPMs. Now I'm going to start it. And you see immediately that the RPMs are jumping up. So idling is around 1700 RPMs. That's what this bike does. It's fairly high, I think, but you need it because the bike tends to stall on low revs if you take off. You can also do other things with this tester, especially if you're going to go and buy a bike from someone and you're not sure about the bike, if it's original or not. You can also check the vehicle information. See, now I have the VIN number, and then you can check it if it matches up with the paperwork. So this is a good tool, and it doesn't run you a lot of money. Spare fuses, you can find it over here, wrapped in this plastic. It's kind of funny. So you can actually replace the fuses in the fuse boxes. And yeah, hopefully you never have to do it, but you might have to do it sometimes. So let me try to put this back in. It's a bit squeezing. There we go. You don't want to have this connector hanging loose. So that's where your diagnostics testing possibility is. And the answer to the question, if this is a BMW or an Indian replica, is very simple. This is a genuine BMW. Great quality, well designed, perfect finish. I can't say nothing wrong about this except a few small things that I mentioned. I drove the bike already and it drives like mad. But you'll see that in my next video when we're going to take it for a spin. Thank you for viewing, and I hope to see you again in my next video. And if you have any comments or recommendations, please feel free to do so. I'm always open for comments and critics. Bye-bye, and see you next time.